David liked to think of himself as an attractive, up-and-coming young businessman. He had intelligent, piercing eyes, which people always assumed were of two different colours, but their assumptions mainly went hand in hand with their general misconceptions about David, because one eye had simply remained permanently dilated following a childhood fight in the playground when he was at school. His eyes, however, only served to add to his overall uniqueness, and he was never actually displeased when he happened to pass a mirror and catch a glance at the striking face topped by a carefully moulded quiff of blonde hair. He caught the Underground every day to fill his seat in the communal sunny offices of the Sun Life Insurance Company. In his spare time, he played the guitar and liked to indulge in amateur astronomy. David always carried a tablet, as he found it infinitely preferable to stare at the bright screen than the worn-out faces of his fellow commuters on the train. During the routine journeys back and forth to work, he was often inspired to write song lyrics and would silently type them out before they disappeared from his mind. One such song, "The Stars Are Out Tonight," had enjoyed mild success and had enabled him to buy his huge telescope, which lived on the terrace of his two-bedroom townhouse suite on the posh side of the city named Stranville. David had a yearning for solitude and could often be found at night sitting out on the terrace silently observing the magnificence of the skies. One night after work, when he was particularly tired, he uncorked a bottle of wine and wearily contemplated what to eat for dinner as he poured himself a generous glass of the comforting substance. The prospect of frozen lasagna, heated up in the microwave, didn't appeal to his taste buds, and in some irrational way he blamed his girlfriend, Carolyn, on the lack of inspiration any of his meals held. She was such a career woman, and her interest in making sure David was well fed and comfortable had never been high on her list, and can now be justly rated as, well, less than zero. Like most women, she talked too much when he was tired and just craving a foot massage and some peace after a hectic day in the office. He would like to tell her to shut up on many occasions so he could concentrate on watching the latest Doctor Who series. That would go down like a lead balloon with Carolyn. Today, David had incorporated a 5-mile sprint into his lunch break, followed by stretching exercises, along with his colleagues on the vast lawns of the Sun Life premises. Most of the locals envied anyone who worked at Sun Life, but David knew that it could instantly turn from the perceived castle it was supposed to be into a prison, depending on the boss's mood. He was wearily wondering if Carolyn was the right woman for him at all. He knew himself well enough to know that he needed a woman to exist entirely to serve him and cater to his needs. When it came to sex, he liked to let his imagination run wild, but Carolyn was too independent to act submissively, just as David wanted during their sexual encounters. He decided to see if she was available on Skype. It looked as though she was, and after a few of the obnoxious rings, responded to his call. Carolyn's hair was pinned up in a classic, elegant way, and her dark skin was glowing with excitement. He could tell she had been busily and happily buzzing around her apartment. "How's it going, love?" David asked, still somewhat taken aback by her radiance. "Oh, fine. We're just about to go out for the charity dinner." "Is that with Rob and the other architects?" David questioned as a stab of jealousy inflamed him. "Yes, darling, but I really must dash now." "Love you," she chimed indifferently as she hung up and the image of her beautiful face in green silk blouse disappeared from David's view. He often dreamed vivid dreams which were so surreal that David couldn't believe they hadn't actually taken place. In the dreams he watched himself performing on a brightly lit stage in an ultra-white bodysuit with exuding black shoulder pads and buttons, and playing to an audience of thousands of people, while an otherworldly look glowed vivaciously in his eyes. In some ways, he always thought he had been born to be a superstar. He found it hard to associate this persona, who echoed his true identity so much, with the man who had to sit around through board meetings in Sun Life, and spent the day observing sharply dressed managers debating over the lunches, and secretaries who ran up and down the sterile corridors, oblivious to everything but their own self-importance. The weather had definitely taken a turn for the worse since lunchtime, and from the sound of the wind whistling through the patio windows, it was blowing a gale outside. After having swallowed the cardboard like lasagna, David decided to go on Facebook for a browse. But look at all the rubbish that people posted soon depressed him further. As he scrolled down, his sighs gradually grew louder, especially at the post from a young man named Kevin, who believed in the end of the world and enjoyed sharing information about aliens and chemtrails and near-extinction events when all the rich people would be going off to hide and live in huge underground bunkers and not give us not about the rest of us. No, Kevin was definitely on the delete and block list. David was simply too tired to think about that. He quickly ran down posts about making thousands of dollars in a few hours while you were basically swinging in a hammock, sucking on your cigar and doing F all to earn it, and remembered with some shame how he had actually once forked out money for a similar scam. He hadn't lost that much on it, only $99, but from there on was inundated with useless emails that came with links to videos of guys with obnoxious voices, endeavouring to allure their audience with the promise of riches amidst their assurances of sincerity and integrity. As he was about to log off, he came across a post in which someone was wildly conjecturing that Kate Middleton had never really been expecting, but had drawn a pregnancy belt, the duration of the pregnancy, which she had forgotten to remove when proudly exited the hospital with the handsome Prince William, her son, and a royal baby bundle. He was actually the Antichrist in her arms. This particular conspiracy theory was all too much for him, and he decided to log off Facebook for the evening. The howling of the wind around the large white shutters of the terrace grew more intense in the silence. David dared to step outside and peer into the lens of his cherished telescope to watch the white clouds dancing fast in front of the keen lens. As he was panning the telescope from side to side, a huge mass of cloud shifted upwards, and what he saw next frightened him to death. The terror he felt was unlike any he had ever known, and was quickly followed by the feel of shameful, scalding stains across his trousers, so that he had to run inside to wash and change. As he stood under the shower trembling, David thought about what he had just seen. The grey and white planet had only appeared for a few seconds. It was huge and definitely very close to Earth. It was obviously hurtling toward us rapidly. David wondered why it had been invisible until now. I mean, he spent most nights peering through his lens of the telescope, but had not seen it. Perhaps Kevin on Facebook was right, and the government really were spraying us with chemtrails, so he would all remain blissfully unaware of the danger which lurked so imminently close. He turned off the flow of water and looked around him, still shaking. Suddenly, all the coffee-coloured tiles on the wall and everything in the room seemed to take on a life and energy of its own. For a fleeting moment, he regretted the time he had spent arguing with Caroline about the colour of the tiles, even though he'd won the argument and got his way in the end. David was considering calling up a newsroom or radio station to share what he'd just witnessed. And after all, the news might make lovers kiss and make up, or stroppy teens admit their love for their families. But the thought of the panic that would ensue if people knew about this was too much for him to contemplate, and he quickly decided against disclosing the information. He deduced that staying in the apartment would probably not be safe, so he quickly dried himself and got dressed, shoving some clothes into a backpack and gathering any food and water supplies he could to get his hands on, to start loading up his beloved Land Rover, glancing around the luscious sitting room with its leather sofa and wrought iron lamps. He regretted being forced to abandon his home and cherished telescope, which unfortunately was not transportable. It would have taken 4 well-built men to carry it up the terrace in the first place. Finally, he grabbed his tablet, guitar, and a sleeping bag and made his way up to the high ground which overlooked Strandville. It was a chilly night for April. David managed to make a campfire and was comfortable enough when he threw on another layer of clothes and was glad to have paid for a good quality warm sleeping bag. The ensuing days were long with no one to talk to, and David walked a lot, hunting for berries and rabbits to eat. At one point, he thought he had imagined all that he'd seen, and should go home again, but he knew he was kidding himself and that he had truly witnessed the approaching planet. After a few days of living in the wild, he felt more physically fit and at peace with himself than he'd ever done before, but he also sensed this was merely a case of the calm before the storm. One night he was just settling down to sleep. He was woken by the earth moving under his sleeping bag. David inwardly panicked as the ground seemed to be actually rolling around underneath him. He looked up to see the moon dulled and huge flashes of fire in the sky, and all at once the bright city lights died and everything lay in darkness as the power grids went down. This was soon followed by explosions all over the city and buildings collapsing. You could see parts of houses crumbling and falling into the river. Even from this distance, the sound of screams and wails coming from everywhere pierced his ears and his heart. And he could see many fires burning in various points around the city. David started to cry when he thought about the people who would die an awful death and how many families would suffer. He was compelled to sit up all night and watch the devastation, feeling helpless as he knew there was nothing he could do to stop any of it. As dawn broke the next morning, it was still hard to see the effects of the explosion the night before, because the air was laden with ash, making his eyes sting. Both mobile and tablet had burned out, and he had no access to the internet or any way to contact anyone. The words of a song, Ashes to Ashes, which had a depressing undertone, came to his mind, and he played and sung them on his guitar. As he sat in his lonely campsite on the hillside, hitting an all-time low.
Saw the details fall away. The shrieking of nothing is killing, just pictures of chap girls and synthesis. And I ain't got no money and I ain't got no hands. But I'm hoping to kick with the planet is glowing. Ashes to ash and funk to bucket. We know Major Tom's a junkie, strung out in heaven's high, hitting an all-time low.
A couple of days later, the earthquake seemed to have completely subsided, and David decided to take a risk and drive down to the centre of Strandville to see if he could do anything to help survivors of the blast. The streets were deserted until he saw a bedraggled woman at the side of the road, flailing her arms and trying to flag him down. David took his foot off the accelerator and the powerful engine slowed down, but as he got closer to her, he realised the woman was completely missing the bottom half of her face and had only a gaping black hole where her mouth was supposed to be. In shock, he quickly sped away as fast as he could. Driving along, observing the surrounding desolation, the song came to his lips, almost out of nowhere. Shortly after this, and his bizarre encounter with a stranger, David's car started juddering, then came to a complete halt. He realised he had run out of petrol. He silently scolded himself at having been so short-sighted and not having considered the possibility of running out of fuel in the days prior to the explosion. he had managed to pull the car up to the side of the road before it came to a complete halt on the deserted street. He grabbed his rucksack and guitar and locked the rest of his belongings into the car. He still had quite a long walk into the town, which gave him more time to witness the damage the horrific impact had caused.
I've never done good things. I've never done bad things. I never did anything out of the blue. Whoa. Want an axe to break the ice. Wanna come down right now. Ashes to ashes, bump to bucket. We know Major Tom's a junkie, strung out.